She posted on Facebook begging for help, and just hours later, she was dead. When police arrived, her car was gone and her husband was missing. But when officers finally found him, he made a choice, one that left their children without either parent. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the heartbreaking details. You're watching Law and Crime.
I swear you'll die. Dad, I gotta die by that! That's crazy, y'all. I ain't willing to die by it.
Shortly after this disturbing live stream, Zaria Carr was dead. The 27-year-old mother, known online as Duchess Dior, had posted a final cry for help on Facebook earlier that same day, writing, quote, "I really don't know what to do. I need help before I lose my life or freedom. My kids need me." The post was timestamped at 5:05 p.m. By 9:30, Georgia police were called to her home for a domestic disturbance. When officers arrived, Zaria was found unconscious, and she was later pronounced dead. Her husband, 36-year-old Shamarcus Carr, a dog breeder known online as the Frenchman, was nowhere to be found. Also missing was Zaria's 2021 Dodge Challenger. An alert was issued for the car, and just after 11 p.m., authorities located it with Shamarcus inside. But before officers could pull him over, he shot himself. He was rushed to the hospital and later died. Now, their children are left without a mother or a father. In the hours leading up to her death, Zaria posted a string of unsettling messages on Facebook. That afternoon, writing, "Somebody tell me how this boy got all my texts and calls." And before that, she said, "I really be too loving and too forgiving. I'm a good woman, but to the wrong boy." She went on to say that she's been embarrassed and disrespected while helping a man fight demons. Earlier that same day, the couple's relationship boiling over on Facebook Live.
She been cheating on and off. Cheating on and off. I've been cheating. I've been my thing. It's really frustrating. It's really aggravating when every time you hear your pick up the phone, he on the phone spraying your name. Yeah, you know my girl was they never touched me. Why are you lying on me?
But then came the most chilling part, a threat caught on live stream.
I swear you'll die. Dad, I gotta die by that! That's crazy.
At one point, Shamarcus is seen reaching for what appears to be a knife.
Say something else in my life. Bitch, sit back and listen. Oh, you gonna stab me? Sit back and listen. You ain't gonna make it out the door, and I'm gonna do it to you. Oh. So the best thing for you to do is up.
Zaria's exact cause of death has not been released, and authorities haven't said what injuries she suffered. The Wayne County Sheriff's Office is handling the investigation into Shamarcus's death. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation's medical examiner's office will perform Zaria's autopsy. And here to break down this story with me is family law attorney Randy Kessler. Randy, thank you so much for coming on today.
Glad to be here, Kennedy.
So such a sad story. Let's just jump right in. When you first saw the live stream and the post, what stood out to you legally?
Oh my gosh, just a terrible, legal and regular and civil and human emotions all blur together in family law, and, it's what we do every day. So this was just one of those, the extreme, I think what we do is tough and people go through a divorce. This is the worst, right? It's not just murder, it's not just death, it's not just family, it's everything mixed in. Just a terrible situation. And, you always worry about the kids. That's the innocent victims. That's where my heart goes.
Right. And she leaves behind 2 kids, just so devastating for them. How seriously do courts and law enforcement typically take public cries for help like the one Zaria posted? Because they're still on her Facebook page. Looking at those posts, it really was a cry for help, it seems like.
Yeah, but I don't think they really do reply to those. And I'm not saying it's without good reason. People post all sorts of things. People make all sorts of comments. People make things for good reasons, for non-good reasons, to get attention. It's very hard to say to the police, hey, somebody posted on Facebook that they're scared. I mean, the police are already trying to figure out murders that already happened and injuries that already happened, or calls directly to them, or reports from witnesses. But, just to say the police should act on every Facebook post that says I'm worried without more detail, it's hard. I mean, we want them to be better at it. Hindsight's 20/20. But yeah, this is just we all want answers. I wish they could have fixed it or cured it or prevented it. I wish somebody had.
Absolutely. Do we think that obviously in this situation, Zaria's husband, according to police, ended up taking his own life? Well, let's say hypothetically that did not happen and that he was still alive. Could Zaria's Facebook posts be considered a form of legal documentation or evidence?
I think it would have come into evidence. Absolutely. There's a law called hearsay, right? You can't put into evidence something that somebody said who's not there to be cross-examined. And she's not there to be cross-examined because she's dead. But there's some exceptions. Dying declaration is one we learn in law school. If you say something, oh my God, my husband's about to shoot me, and then you get shot, that comes in because it's more likely to be true than not. You had no reason to say that if you were about to die. Also, if it explains conduct, and also to impeach him, it would have come into evidence, and it would have been hard for him to defend that. On the other hand, his lawyers would say, I can't really even ask her questions about why she would have said that. She's not here. It's not fair to me. It would have been less powerful than if she was still alive and said, yeah, I said that because here's why I said it. So it would have come into evidence. It would have been tough evidence for the defense to overcome. Um, but it's not the only evidence you need. I think you still need some motive, opportunity. How did the murder happen? Was he there? Just someone saying, I'm afraid that my husband's going to kill me isn't enough to tie him to the murder on its own, in my opinion.
And we know that we can't protect Zaria, but maybe someone else is in a similar situation. So, what legal protections are usually available for someone in Zaria's situation?
Boy, this is going to sound crazy, but common sense, right? There are legal protections, but first things first. And we always tell people, a protective order, which you can get from the courts, is just a piece of paper. You can get an order from a judge if there's real, evidence of danger or somebody has hurt you or threatened to hurt you. You can ask a judge to preemptively sign a document saying, this guy is not allowed to come to your house. And if he comes over, just call the police and show them this piece of paper. But before we get to legal stuff, it's all common sense, right? If you know someone's angry at you, leave. Get away from him or her. Don't be around there. Let the situation calm down, then call lawyers and then try to get the courts involved. But first things first, don't bank on the legal system to help you. Everyone's got to be self-aware. It's really it's an important lesson here.
Right. And it's really unfortunate because in a lot of cases we hear that people never think that it would go this far, right? No one ever thinks that, hey, if I don't leave right now, maybe my life is in danger. I mean, I know she posted about it, but still. So, if you could just explain, if someone does feel like their life is in danger, how quickly can they obtain an emergency protection order? And also, just is that process as easy as it sounds? Because I know in a lot of cases, or in all cases, don't you have to put your address down? And a lot of people don't like to do that.
Yes, and forgive me because I'm going to answer one other question before I get to that, which is, you know, she was public, right? She went out public and she probably thought, I'm telling the world, so he's not going to do it because now he knows that I've outed him. Crazy people that are going to commit a murder, common sense doesn't apply. So, using your rational kind of, hey, I'm telling everybody if someone kills me, it's him, isn't going to stop somebody from doing bad. So the next step is, as you discussed, protective orders. You can get a protective order pretty easily. I've been practicing law almost 40 years. When I started, you had to go ask the court to get a court date, and then you had to serve the other side and let them know there was going to be a court date, and it took a while. Well, things have evolved. You can go in by yourself without the other side there on your own or with a protected group or a victims' rights group or a lawyer and say to a judge, please sign a protective order telling my spouse, my husband, my boyfriend, my girlfriend that they can't be around me. And the court will do so almost every time if you have convinced the judge that there is a likelihood of immediate danger on the condition that the other side be given a chance to be heard within a short period of time. Most states, it's within a month at the latest. They try to schedule a quick court date so that if someone is kicked out of their house on what we call an ex parte order, right, an order that was gotten without any input from the defendant, you have to give them a chance to be heard pretty quickly to come in and say, that's not true. He or she was lying. They were drunk. They don't know what they're talking about. But getting that initial order, it's pretty instantaneous. As soon as you go down to the court, but again, Kennedy, it's a piece of paper. And the other side may not even know it exists until the police can serve them with it. But what it does is it lets you call the police and say, I don't have to convince you, Mr. Officer, that my husband's being violent. Just look in your files. I've got a police, are required to do something by this court order. You're required to keep him away from me. So it's a good first step. First step, of course, is 911 and get the police out there if there's danger. Second step is in the next couple of days, I don't want him to be near me. Get that order in place.
But do the waters get a little murky when it comes to kids, though? Because I know they had two children together. So how does that work? When you're trying to get this protection order, but also you share children, and maybe they're saying, no, you're not going to keep my child away from me. So that makes them even more scared. How does a
Sure.
person go about that?
Well, there's a lot there, right? Because, of course, protective orders are good and they serve a good purpose, but they also get abused, right? Some people come into judges and say, I know how I'm going to get custody of my kids. I'm going to falsely accuse my spouse of being abusive. The judge will sign an order keeping my spouse away from me and the kids until we can get heard. But hopefully when the spouse comes in and gets heard or the other side gets heard, the judge reconciles it. But unfortunately, those people are sometimes too afraid of courts that they just say, I'd rather sign away my rights or agree to get some minimal rights than risk the chance that the judge believes her that I was violent. So it's a complicated situation. Getting good lawyers can help, being prepared, getting evidence, thinking about how would you explain yourself and your situation to someone who doesn't know you? How do you convince them? Pictures, recordings, text, you get it all together. So the best way is to be prepared, keep those things and keep them safe. Send them to a friend. If you have text messages where your husband threatens you or your spouse threatens you, keep them safe, copy them, send them to your lawyer, send them to your friend, put them in a safe deposit box because that's what evidence is. And that's how we get to the truth is using evidence.
Yeah, definitely some good advice there. Well, what I thought was extremely jarring was the live stream, the Facebook Live that happened shortly before Zaria was found dead. Is there any legal requirement for police to act after seeing a live stream like this if they're alerted? Because, of course, officers aren't just searching Facebook all day looking for trouble. But if someone saw the live stream and they called 911, how are police expected to act?
So the live stream is different than a 911 call. 911, you have to respond. They've got their own way to dissect it and decide which to respond to first. But, if we had enough police officers and enough law enforcement to respond every time there's a live stream or a video or a screenshot of somebody making a threatening comment, we'd all be much safer. Police are not expected to act because somebody online says, I'm afraid so-and-so is going to kill me, or somebody says, I'm going to kill you. There's, also a fine line between hyperbole. There are people that talk like that all the time. I'm going to kill that guy. I'm going to kill her. I'm going to kill, there's too much of that online. And the problem is, how do the police know what's real and what's not real? It's always a judgment call. That's why the victim has to be more proactive and not just let somebody else come to their rescue. They have to stand up and say, look, I'm scared. Here's why I'm scared. And the live stream, those statements are very powerful. That is what we call corroboration. It's not just my word. Look at what he said. So it is helpful. But on its own, a policeman just seeing something online is probably not going to react. Probably has too many other cases where there's already more evidence of something going wrong that they have to investigate. It's just sad, but that's probably the way it is.
Yeah, so sad. And right now, authorities haven't released Zaria's cause of death. Why might they delay that?
Well, there are a lot of copycats. There are a lot of people that want to be part of a public story. If they say she died by poisoning, you might have tips that come in and say, I know about her husband buying poison. Well, did you know about that? Or did you hear what we announced publicly and now you want to be famous by being involved in the case? So sometimes you keep it close to the vest, you do your research, your investigation, and if you find somebody that corroborates, that reinforces the theory that you have as a police officer, and there was no other way they could have known about the poison but to have heard about it from the defendant, then it makes it much more believable and easier to prosecute a case in court. Of course, in this case, the presumed defendant is dead. So maybe there's a theory that maybe there's somebody else. They want to exclude any possibilities, and they don't want to give anybody any ideas of how to supplement that theory. Sometimes you do keep it close to the vest. And also, they're not out there looking for a murderer, right? In some cases, the police put all the information out there saying, we need somebody in a blue car leaving, North Carolina, going north on Highway 95, whatever it is, because they want to catch the person. Well, apparently there's no rush to catch the person who did it since they believe they have the right person and that person's dead.
Right. What are some of the reasons that the GBI might take over the autopsy rather than local authorities? Or is that something that commonly happens in Georgia?
It happens all the time. It's a matter of resources. It's a matter of what kind of resources do they have to investigate? Is it a poisoning death? Is it a murder death? Was it, are there interstate weapons? Is it going to get turned over to even somebody else like the FBI instead of the GBI? It just depends on bandwidth. and who's contacted. But law enforcement is about preventing crimes. GBI is about investigating them. So this sounds more like investigation now. You don't need law enforcement to go out and catch somebody. They just need to figure out what happened and how to keep it from happening again.
Right. And do you think, we've been speaking a lot about the Facebook posts and the live streams, but still, like how we said, law enforcement can only investigate things when they are called, right? When a victim comes forward. Do you think that law enforcement had enough to intervene before it got to this point? Because sometimes some things are happening behind closed doors, but some victims might not think, oh, this is enough, or oh, police may not arrest him for this.
I don't know, but she obviously was smart and found a way to have followers and be an influencer. So there's a good possibility she might have reached out, whether it's to authorities or somebody in a position of authority to help. And maybe that's what the investigation is about, is why didn't we catch this? Why didn't we prevent this? Again, I'm not privy to all the information, but that certainly could be the case. This is not a low profile case where somebody just found somebody in the backwoods years after the fact. This is somebody who was public and was out there. And maybe there was more information that should have been acted on. And that's how we make new laws, and that's how we implement protocols, is by seeing problems in the past that we don't want to repeat.
Well, what laws in Georgia govern how domestic violence cases are handled? Are they stronger or weaker than other states?
Uh, so every state's evolving. Georgia's got some pretty good laws on how to handle domestic violence. And again, the ability for someone to go into court without the other side even being heard, and to get the judge to issue an order saying stay away until we can have clarity on what happened, those are pretty powerful. So domestic violence laws have come a long way, and again, there is a minority. There are a few people that abuse those and make false claims, and usually those get borne out. But domestic violence claims are taken much more seriously today. I think also one of my favorite sayings is sunlight is the best disinfectant. Now that we talk about it, now that it's out there and people know that it does happen more often than we'd like to think, and it happens everywhere, not just in poor or, small households or big households or rich, or it's everywhere. And so I think people are more open, and judges are more open to the idea that maybe he or she's telling the truth, not just because they hate their spouse because they caught them cheating, but they are really worried about it. And we err on the side of protecting the victim. Let's safeguard the victim, give a protective order, and if we're wrong, then we'll make the alleged victim, pay somehow by attorney's fees or something else by making a false claim. But let's not be the judge that wakes up in the morning and says, I didn't give her a protective order, and he came over and did something bad to her the next day. Then it's on the judge.
Right. Just so tragic. And then we just talked about not too long ago about the kids that both parents are leaving behind. Now that the parents are deceased, what usually happens to the children legally?
There's foster care. There's going to be a debate about who should have custody. Hopefully there's a relative that steps up and wants to adopt, or at least take them in as foster care. The departments of family and children's services, they want to put the children in a safe, stable environment, but there's a priority given if they're relatives that already know the children, and obviously it just makes sense. But they'll vet it, and they'll make sure that this new home is safe for the children. Hopefully there are relatives that are willing to do that and can do that, or there's a family that can adopt or at least foster care these children. But there's a tough life ahead for them. And, aside from the emotional part of it, there's a financial part. What resources did mom have to leave to the children? What about dad? Insurance policies for dad are probably gone because of what he did. He killed himself. Insurance policies on mom. Let's hope she had some that at least help the children.
Right. But what happens when it's a sticky situation like this, right? When the dad is assumed to have potentially killed the mother, right? Because if you do have grandparents, the dad had parents, the mom had parents, how does the custody battle work when one side of the do you understand what I'm trying
I
to say?
understand what you're saying. Does dad's parents, do they lose out because their son
Right.
was a murderer? Not automatically. If they knew about it, and it's a question of judgment. And look, this is the most bland, generic, ambiguous standard in the law. It's what's in the children's best interest. So you have to decide what's in the children's best interest. And all sorts of things go on in the judge's mind. Which set of grandparents have been closer to the children, which ones are local and closer so the children maintain their social environment. Or maybe it's better for the children to be out of this area where everyone knows what happened to the children's parents and to start all over in a new city and a new state. So it's a complicated mix, but no, automatically dad's parents don't lose out just because their son did this, unless they were somehow involved. It comes down to more of a question of which set of grandparents, if it's a battle of the grandparents, will be better for the children. And hopefully the judge will say both sets of grandparents can be involved and can raise the children and support them together. In an ideal world, and my ideal solution would be the grandparents work together and somehow share custody and say these children need as much support and love as they can get. We all want to be involved.
In your opinion, does this case raise any questions about victim blaming, especially when the abuse is aired publicly?
It's a terrible thing on its own, victim blaming. And, because she was public or because she said things or because, it just sounds like he was, for want of a legal term, messed up, right? He was hurt. He was angry. Whatever he felt, there's no justification for what he did. He obviously at least felt some sort of remorse. He knew that he'd done wrong. Taking his own life, if indeed he was the murderer, which it seems he was, sort of is the ultimate kind of apology in his own twisted mind that I did wrong. I can't live in this world. Could have done better by staying alive and apologizing to his children and trying to help them get some closure. But there's just no right answer to that question. I wish there was.
What lessons should viewers take away from this case, legally and personally?
Don't underestimate the power of anger and hostility, and especially in loving relationships. We're seeing this all too many times. We're talking about it, with you and others, how, relationships that go bad, instead of going to family or priest or divorce lawyers and getting separation legally or morally, people just react, really fast and do crazy things and cause harm to people that they love. If I can't have her, nobody else is going to have her. Or she did this to me, I'll prove to her that she shouldn't have done it to me. And those, don't underestimate the power of somebody being angry that's just reacting. We always tell people, take a few days when the confrontation happens, when you file for divorce, when you bring up the subject of divorce, be separated, be in a safe place. Even though you never think your spouse is going to be somebody that's like that, we're going to be talking about on the show, you never ever know. Be safe, ounce of prevention, 10 times better than a pound of cure.
Yeah, always better safe than sorry. Well,
Yep.
Randy, thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure.
Zaria's friends say she had a smile that lit up a room and a big heart. She leaves behind 2 children. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.